Miyamoto.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon. The 120,000 Haitian buildings, a lot of buildings, but we fix them. So next 20 minutes to about 30 minutes, my discussion is why we miss on a loss estimation, and if we miss, how we're going to go about it. So that would be a discussion. And I think we're going to have about 10 minutes question and answers after that. So our company is a global earthquake structural engineering company and located in about 15 different locations. And our experience comes from not only just doing a simulation or analysis or engineering, but also be on the sites. I think that's really important. After the disaster, be on the sites, really understand what happened to it and why it happened to it, and how we can actually make a better estimation or better way to build things, or better way to reconstruct. So since 1971, our employees and the consultants and our partners been in over 100 different earthquakes. And personally, I've been involved for almost 20 years now to visiting, not only just go there, but also live it in it. And for example, with the Sabine cast, she actually lives in Haiti, and I've been in Haiti since 2010, and also after Christchurch earthquake, I've been there pretty much. So if you see disaster, you're going to find me. I don't think nothing will happen here. This is a picture taken around 2010. It's Christchurch, New Zealand. It's a beautiful city, about 350,000 people. It's unbelievable, just the building they had, the just beautiful cultural heritage buildings. Today, look like this. They lost almost 1,700 to 1,800 mid-rise, high-rise commercial buildings out of about 2,400 buildings in the CBD. Can you imagine? And you're talking about 80% total loss. And insurance claims are over $12 to $13 billion now. Is this being expected? Probably not. I bet you the loss estimation is no more than 1 billion or 2 billion, the maximum for this town of size here. Is this because the New Zealand engineers are bad? Constructions are bad? I said not. These guys are good. The New Zealand engineers are good as Japanese or California engineers. Almost good. No, they are really excellent engineers. And construction quality is good. License systems are fantastic. And everything there. But why this happened here? Let me show you why. This is a building. So I took this picture. It's a 26-story concrete hotel building built in about 1995. And you see a little kink in the structure. It's tilted about 1 meter or so onto the left. The reason is 3 columns at the 11th level ruptured. And it causes a tilt like that. So if you do a, say, standard PML, the probable maximal loss analysis before this event, I bet you we're going to say about 20% PML, maybe 30% at the maximum. But this is 100% loss. The reason is can they be repaired? Probably. Can be strengthening? Probably. But it probably cost up to 50-60% of replacement value doing that. And the owner did have the 100% replacement value insurance, so he decided to replace it. And but this met the intent of a building code, by the way. No one died. So if one follows the building code, it doesn't matter, Japanese, American, Chilean, New Zealand building codes, you're going to see this. People may not die from it, but you may see the major loss in the building. Now, so why this supposed 20% loss become 100% loss anyway? And these are reasons. First, This was a highly insured society. I never see anything like that. It's got to be, I mean, almost everybody had the 100% replacement value insurance. And compared to, say, California, we have about 8% that insured for seismic. This is close to, I think, 80, 90% of the people insured up to replacement value. This is something just was nice. It was definitely cheap, affordable insurance was there. And over-reliance on the software prediction. I'm going to get into a little bit later on this one subject, but the software prediction simulation is a pure science based on the hazard, based on the vulnerability, based on the exposure. But that current model does not really have how society reacted to it. Even that simulation tell you 20% loss, it doesn't mean 20% loss. Depends on how engineers, how the government, how people reacted to it. That makes a huge difference in the loss. That's not currently in a part of the equation. And because of the such abundance of insurance, because of the earthquake was somewhat rare event in New Zealand. Last true urban disaster happened in New Zealand was 1931. So risk reduction program actually reduced the risk by the engineering construction. It was never considered so seriously, especially the town of Christchurch, considered to be moderate seismic area. So there were a lot of so-called dangerous buildings exist. And there was definitely conservative engineering judgment in both owners engineers and also government engineers and also the engineers from the insurance industry for deciding should it be replaced or should it be repaired, the decision factor of it. See, one thing we should realize though, after a major event like this, that engineering communities, engineers, they get taxed heavily. Think about it. The town of Christchurch, about 350,000 people. Probably they had a couple hundred engineers. Now suddenly they have to deal with this incredible disaster, and most of the engineers, they were not experienced doing the seismic strengthening or repair. Even in California today, let's say we have probably several hundred structural engineering companies. Maybe I would say probably 10, 20% of the companies in California, they do routinely seismic strengthening and repair. So the expertise is somewhat limited. So if you never ever done anything like that and try to use these engineers to make a judgment, it becomes difficult. For example, I'm not really an expert for hurricane engineering personally. And if you ask me to design say your house in say Florida Key, I think my engineering becomes so conservative that you cannot afford to buy the house. Because it's not my expertise. I've never seen the hurricane personally that much, you know. So that's why I think it's so important to have the engineering expertise, especially specialized for the repair and the strengthening. That is so critical after the major event like this one. And also, the government policy is a critical one. The New Zealand, the way it worked out is the central government essentially red zone the whole CBD, and they control the access and also reconstruction. It's part of it because safety is the most important factor of it. That's how government recognized that, and I agree with the concept. Especially many high-rise buildings are tilted, you know. But if you look up, say, a country like Japan, where they go through this reconstruction and disaster, you know, every 5, 10 years, essentially since World War II, that they understand the so-called government policy is so important for reconstruction. And local governments are important. They realize that. So in Japan, what they do is, after a major event, for example, Tohoku event, I was there, central government does coming through for emergency response components. But after they try to just get away there as soon as possible and empower the local governments. Because they understand the local government, their policy, their decision making is much more long-term say, sustainability of a community, and they try to instigate that local commercial sector. That is actually so critical after that major disaster. So, and obviously central government do send money and expertise to local government, of course. But that is such an important concept of it. And how society react to the earthquake itself. That is a really culmination of the insurance conditions, how much they have and how much they don't, and engineers, and how the government and policy is, or a culmination of it. And this is a kind of missing link right now for that loss estimation. Now, at the GEM, we recognize that this missing link is important. So we try to put the social components as a part of a forecasting tool. Now, are we going to forecast this thing? I don't know. You know, this is really complex stuff. I went to my California State University for my Bachelor of Science for 8 years, you know. And the first 4 years my major was cultural anthropology before I changed to structural engineering. Don't ask me why, but I did anyway. And let me tell you, that first 4 years of cultural anthropology experience I had is something much more important today, what I do to understand the loss, what I understand it, how I go about it, much more than it's my structural engineering expertise. And I think that type of a social understanding is so critical to understand the loss and how to go by after that. So because of these reasons, there was large claims and a lost city. It really didn't help anyone, you know. And it was horrible, the New Zealanders, they lost the Christchurch, essentially. And lost the many heritage buildings. It's a culture and a history of the city, the country. And insurance industry didn't really win either. It's 11, 12, 13 billion dollars claim. It's just tremendous. And because of that, the whole society is kind of a market it's really difficult because of how the society reacted to it. Now any buildings less than 33% of a capacity, or even sometimes less than 70% of a capacity of a current building code, it's hard to be on the market today. And obviously insurance is much more expensive than ever before. So it's definitely causing a difficulty in the whole economy there. So how are we going to do that? Well, here's a traditional computer simulation model we use every day, right? Seismic hazard input, and the building vulnerability is an input. And also building data, exposure data is an input. And put it in there and have a probabilistic evaluation, get the risk identification of it. But the social reactions, that is a component I think we need to really think about a little bit more. 20% PML doesn't mean 20% loss. It can be much less, much higher. Depends on how society reacts to it. And you can even average out either. Now, option for managing earthquake risk. How are we going to control the loss? How are we going to estimate the loss better? Option 1, do nothing. That's the option many people actually choose, you know. Option 2, buy a whole bunch of insurance. That's a sound idea too. But without option 3, reducing risk, proactively manage the risk reduction, it's not really healthy. That's what we saw in New Zealand. I think combination is really balancing act between 2 and 3. Really understand the realistic potential risk and loss of a portfolio look like, and proactively acting on it to make the reduce or control the risk. You can eliminate it ever, but you can control them, understand and control it. Then obviously transfer the risk by an insurance, and combination of it. I think that's going to impact the clients much better and also society much better. Give you a few examples of how both the private sector and the commercial sector reduce the risk. This is the just map of one of the industrial clients we dealt with, and you can see the color coding, such as the blue is the PML of 10 to 20%, and yellow is a high PML of 30 to 50%, and the red is a very high PML and 50% and higher. So you can kind of see color coordinate of that portfolio. So we use the tool like a PML to not only understand the risk, but also control the risk. Just like this. So this example has a building A, B, C, D, E. The building A is a steel frame structure built in 1966. And the PML, the probable maximal loss, we estimate about 20%. And the business interruption is about 3 to 4 weeks. And building B, it's a newer building a little bit, built in 1968, but made of reinforced concrete. So PML is much higher, 50% or higher. And also BI is about 6 months. And this building B, for the operational point of view, actually much more important than building A. So therefore, that the further recommendation and the further review and strengthening is required. You see, it's not like we go in to strengthen everything. There's a need to identify the bad apples and picking it. And that is a cost-effective seismic risk reduction program. And to give you an actual example of it, how it happened. This is a project done by my partner, Peter Yanev and Tom Chan. And this is a big brewery facility in LA. And they did the seismic risk reduction program right before the 1994 LA earthquake, Northridge earthquake. So this is a prime example of how the risk reduction program works or not work, actually. And so this was a big facility, about $1.3 billion set at the time. And location is right at the epicentral area of Northridge. And because of the building stocks here is pretty old, about 1950 for many concrete structures, business interruption is estimated to be 18 months and even longer. And this is a big deal. Not only potential the loss for asset is one thing, but business interruption is a big deal for this facility. Obviously, beer is very important, people in LA, so for that matter, too. So we went through they went through all the risk components of it, assigned the PML, assigned the business interruption, and picked several buildings to strengthening and equipments to strengthening. And this is one of a brewery structure. And you can see the slight difference between the left and the right picture. You see the right picture, some of window being filled up. It's concrete shear wall they provided. So obviously the strengthening has to be done during the operational. You know, business cannot be interrupted. So something sensible approach. You don't have to change everything, doing something a little bit. And this campus went through the magnitude 7 Northridge earthquake, and here are the results. Company estimate the following. They estimate that they avoid the direct loss of about $350 million. One. Two, they estimate the business interruption avoided about $400 million and associate the market share loss. So they estimate about $1 billion savings per se. And the plant was back in operation within the 4 days. Cost them about $10 million to do seismic strengthening in 1992 and 3. In 94, earthquake happened. So the cost benefit for this particular case was 101. So as an investment point of view, this is a tremendous return of investment, of course. And of course, they have an insurance program to supplement this together because essentially this elimination, reduction, not elimination, reduction of a risk, control and risk. So therefore, certain amount have to be transferred to insurance. But you see, so this case, the claim to insurance industry was very limited, obviously. Everybody won. Company won, insurance won, and people who like drinking beer, LA won. You see, that's actually beauty of the total risk management, combination of all the things. And show you some of the examples of a public entity, how they reduce risk and control risk. This is the LA airport. LAX, I'm sure many of you guys went through this airport maybe recently. We're in the middle of construction right now. And it's a pretty old airport. Something's built 1950s and 60s and 70s. And when we approached the management about 3-4 years ago, I was amazed to see that no one really thinking about seismic risk program at all. They didn't know even the risk, well, how much risk they have or how much they don't have risk for these facilities. I just couldn't believe it. And I mean, it seems to me LAX should be the place they should be thinking. So they realized that their information is really old and they need to really look into it. And here's a best practice. So they went through to get every single facilities and equipments. And where we did it is we used their terminology. Operational, the business interruption, which is the most critical. Because the LAX is just like many other airports, their revenue is come from how many flights coming through day by day. So green indicates the buildings which has less than 5 days of a business interruption, and the yellow is less than 5 weeks, and red is more than 5 weeks. So color coded like this, and especially talking about exactly what that CFO or the operation manager is really keen about, which is that the operational status, how many days they can be interrupted. And that is the main message to them. Not about direct damage, because they got the plain insurance, they can deal with that. But they are really interested about the business interruption days. So now, looking this, clearly you can see that something's not quite right. For example, this is a new international terminal they just built. Of course, it's green because it's new construction. They meet the current requirement for non-structural and structural criteria. But access to this new building is going through the old terminal, which is a yellow status. 5 weeks in business interruption. You see? So now looking at, well, we have to do something about this building. And so that's how they actually decided what components they are going to strengthen first, based on how does it affect the operational business interruption status. This is a project in Manila. World Bank commissioned us to look into the risk exist in a city and communicate with the government. That's our mandate. Our focus is schools and hospitals. And what you see here is the little dots is a school building or hospital. About 3,800 buildings out there in the city. Gray is the boundary of Manila itself. And the black line you see, that is what they call the West Valley Fault. That has a capacity to rupture about 9 to 7.5, anytime. Could be right now. And this city has not really thought about earthquake risk much at all. Typhoon, hurricane, yes, they have. Flood, yes, but not earthquakes. So, schools and hospitals, they're made of a concrete structure, what we call non-ductile concrete, which means really brittle concrete buildings, and extremely dangerous. And so first thing we did is a typical kind of a damage index approach, probable maximal loss. What would the percentage damage look like? And you can kind of see the red and green and yellow, some percentage distribution of it. But this doesn't mean anything to decision makers. So what we did is, knowing the damage ratio of a building, knowing the density of a structure, how many students in it, we know what potential death ratio, how many fatalities of students at each building. So green dot indicates the building which could kill 5 students or less. And the yellow is somewhere between 5 to 20. And red is more than 20. So you can kind of see that the dangerous building is spread out over that town. Now I know it sounds kind of harsh about how many children dying, but message have to be crystal clear to make government to move to do right things. You know, I don't talk about the inelastic demand of structural systems. I don't talk about the financial loss. That's not what works here. What works is that how many students die. So this is actually a very interesting graph, believe it or not, to me. Now, horizontal axis is a number of a building, just arbitrary numbering, building number 1 through number 3,800. And the vertical axis is the number of fatalities. This is really interesting. This is something I noticed for quite a long time. This building kills about 110 students. This building kills about 100 students. This one, about 100. This is about 90. This is about 80. You see the patterns here? It's not like every building kills equally. There's a bad apples in a building stock. That usually causes the havoc. Always like that. You see Christchurch earthquake, out of about 2,400 buildings, we lost about 180 to 200 people. Many come from actually 2 buildings. And this is something we see this all the time in a disaster. See, hurricanes are different. Typhoons different. It's fairly uniformly damaged. Well, it's pretty much averaged out. You can kind of see that. The earthquake is not average at all. Earthquake is definitely at the few bad apples, causes the major financial loss, major business interruption, major death. Always the case. So that's kind of bad news, you may think. But to me, that's the kind of good news, because I think seismic risk reduction becomes suddenly cost effective. And this is, we normalized it. Building number 1 killed the most, about 110 students. And building number 3,800 is 0 or pretty negligible number of death. So you can kind of see how it works out. Check this out. Top 200 or worst 200 kills almost 25% what total death expected. 6,400 students out of about 24,000 expected. At this time, 80% of fatalities, almost 20,000 of them, belong to 40% of buildings. This means you don't have to spend $2 billion to strengthen every single building to make a huge impact and a risk. Just strengthen 200 buildings, strengthen 1,000 buildings makes a huge difference. You see? Now, after this, the government decided to put about $80 million to strengthening first phase of about 200 buildings, because they figured that they can make a difference, spending a little bit amount of money to make a huge difference. You see? The risk reduction program is not very expensive if it's done right, if it's thought through right. So this is one of the examples we're doing in Istanbul. It's just strengthening is done similar way we did in Manila, but strengthening done from externally, and multiple construction done during the summer breaks, you know. Conclusions. I think it's definitely site-specific information is extremely important, and this is something that's not really happening. I think both reinsurance and the insurance industry gotta have a better site-specific information, and exposure data is so critical, and those exposure data changes all the time. And I think that there's just that getting an expert opinion about it is one of the most critical things. And don't have to be complex data. For example, the one Manila one, we try to get them good exposure data as much as possible. Use the local engineers, organize it, and just about 2-page forms they filled up. And that's what we really need to have a really good database for exposure. And also need to understand some social reaction components of it. I know this thing doesn't quite exist today, but this is something that is extremely important to understand. What is the potentially government policy is look like? What is how the engineers may react to it? And that is so critical, especially the place where the rare earthquakes going on. If earthquake happens all the time, this kind of thing is somewhat normalized. But rare place is actually very important. And encourage our clients to risk reduction program. I think this is so critical. As you saw the examples of it, I think we can definitely convince the people to do the risk reduction program. This is going to cause a win-win-win condition for everyone. Then we need to install the expert post-disaster assessment. You got to understand that the engineers, they don't do seismic repair and strengthening on a daily basis. Very few people do that. And you need experts to help local engineers to make sure that they're having the right judgment, so there is no too conservative or too radical judgment happening. This applies to any countries, by the way. If you all those things, I think we can forecast and control loss most efficiently. And I think most importantly, I think we can save lives, you know? And I think as a risk professionals, I think that is our ultimate goal. To not only save their businesses, which I think we can, but also save lives. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much indeed, Kit. That was excellent. So it's now my task to seek any questions from the audience, allowing due time for Alison to find you. So, do we have any questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
You talked about the bad apples in buildings, and if we can find them and retrofit them, we could reduce a huge amount of losses and fatalities.
Yeah.
But is the process of finding these kind of buildings straightforward? How was your experience in this matter?
How do you find it?
Yes. Is it simple?
I think so, I would say. It's all come down to the knowledge and local level. For example, we're doing a program in Haiti right now, similar kind of program as the Manila. Train the local engineers to assess the building to get the right information so we can process it. And so having a good mixture of local engineers and some certain international expertise, answer your question, yes, I think you can definitely get the good information. And now knowing, because science does exist today, which can really focus fairly good for building behaviors, you know. We understand, as long as we know the hazard, soil characteristics, vulnerability, functions, you know, having a good exposure data, yeah, I think you can focus fairly decent, about 90% confidence level, so somewhat maybe conservative way. So once they pick those things, then you can definitely do analysis to see which are the bad apples.
Because we are talking about the larger scale of buildings in a city scale.
Yeah.
So if you just want to rely on urban inventory data, maybe you miss some of these bad apples.
I agree.
So
I agree.
Maybe
100%.
you have to go through some surveys and inspections, and it could be costly. So my question is it that practical and easy in terms of energy and cost?
I agree 100% is that you need to have a ground information from ground to look through the buildings, not a desktop or a satellite image. I mean, those are supplemental information you can use, but you need to be on the ground to do the so-called bad apples approach. But as I said about example of Manila or Haiti, you don't have to have the so-called international engineers doing this. The local engineering capacity, they're good enough, long as the led right, put this way. You can definitely collect the information for what you need to do cost effectively.
Okay.
That's what we do for the World Bank projects and stuff like that. They're massive scale.
Yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more general technical questions? Richard?
Thank you. Do you expect that we'll see increasing levels of investment in loss reduction?
Well, that's a good question, you know. Place like Haiti, place like New Zealand, or place like Japan, yes, because bad news is those earthquakes happened, so society is keenly aware of that risk. So I guess bad news is those things happen, but good news is that they will act on it. Difficult place is obviously nothing happened yet. And that place is the most difficult to do the so-called investment. But even places like California, seems like we have a frequent earthquakes. But yet it's really hard for people to spend money on risk reduction because you don't see the so-called ROI right away, you know. But that's why we use program like this one because we need to really convince the decision makers, essentially CEO, CFO, operation people, you know. So we need to use their lingo. It cannot use the damage index or stuff like that. That's why we use the communication tools such as death ratio, such as the financial loss, such as the business interruptions. And I think if we use those terminologies, yes, I think you can definitely make the changes. Because they see as the loss control program is really important. Because they see there's so many examples of bad things happening up there.
Thank you.
One of the interesting things you said, Kit, was the code, the building code, was effectively a life preservation code, which I guess from a property insurance perspective is an ancillary benefit. We're looking at preserving the buildings as well.
Right.
What do you think engineers can do to enhance the code to make a more resilient building stock?
Today, the technologies and also building code or provisions to make the building, say, sustainable after the major event does exist. And in many cases, our experience tells us about 2% to maybe 5% maximum additional cost to the total construction cost to make that buildings like that usable after the major event, operational after the major event. So you see that the investment is a fairly small amount because structural components is usually only 20% or less of a total building cost. So enhancement structural doesn't really impact the total investment cost much at all. Part of International Building Code, which American code, does have the so-called enhanced performance provisions. So does the Japanese code. So does the New Zealand building codes. You know, do engineers use it? Not really. Not really. I mean, looking at the high-rise buildings, how those things being engineered in California, no, it's not designed for the so-called enhanced performance at all. I think that's a tragedy, really. And I think engineers, that's our responsibility to communicate to the society, quite frankly. And we haven't done a really good job yet. And that's our responsibility. And I think society expect us more than just the life safety. I think that's a minimum requirements. But society expect us to build the sustainable societies, actually.
I certainly think you've done a good job of communicating to us in terms of the risk and reward here. So I think there's one more question there.
I just wanted to ask, in more developed countries, how much do you find the bad apples are due to bad workmanship or bad design?
In which country?
So let's say in Christchurch, how much of it was due to bad design or just bad workmanship on the ground?
Well, as I said, New Zealand engineers are almost good as Japanese. No, they are really good, I said. And of course, there are bad engineered buildings do exist. And CTV building, which killed it's 80 some people. It's quite a bit of it. One building that collapsed and killed many people. And yeah, it was badly designed in a sense, but it was a pre-earthquake building code in Christchurch too. It's a fairly old building, 1970s, something like that. And yeah, it was a badly kind of a conceptualized, but it was something that no one knew about it, really, about earthquake behavior that much. So I don't really blame on an engineer, I don't think, Some of the seismic strengthening technique I thought they used in New Zealand could be better. For example, little things for the heritage buildings. What was made of a brick. And one of the ways to seismically strengthening is tied in, like you got roof or floor tied in with this epoxy board. I noticed that many people put it in a 90-degree like that. But in California, we put 22.5 degree like this. Because when you do that, it seems little things, but it will capture the several width of bricks and kind of hard to take it out. But if you're going straight, tend to become slip off like this. Little things like that, I don't say it's a bad, but little things could have improved and it could have better results, I think, But I thought, generally speaking, New Zealand, they did a great job, though. Because in my opinion, after the major event, I think the so-called red tag was around 10% to me, and total loss should be about 5%. Yellow tag was slight damage, probably about 30% range,
So we've now reached 2 o'clock, and so I'll close the meeting. Just like to once again thank Dr. Kit Miyamoto for coming along today, and thank all of you for coming as well. So once again, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was great.